Because over the past 5 years, the upper chamber, where they make important decisions of state, has spent nearly 2 million quid on alcohol. This is subsidised alcohol. They get it cheap, folks. What sort of a chamber is that? Why are there more than 800 lords in the House of Lords? It's the second biggest legislative chamber in the entire world. Only the Red Assembly in China has more delegates than the House of Lords. How much longer should party leaders and prime ministers be allowed to point their mates to this bloated, hard-drinking chamber where they glug their way through millions of quid worth of booze? It's getting a bit ridiculous. Let's talk to Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online. Good evening, Brendan.
Hi, Kevin.
I think my first question to you must be, where were we? Because we were talking about this 1 week ago when Donald Trump rudely interrupted us with a pointless press conference about how he'd found the vaccine to save the world. Wasn't true, but welcome to Washington. So I'm glad I got you back on what I think is quite an important issue. Jokes aside, this House of Lords spending a fortune on booze, more than 800 of them. The leaders of our parties and the prime ministers of this country will not stop appointing more and more of their mates into that chamber. There are 11 Lib Dem MPs. There are 89 Lib Dem peers. This is insane, isn't it?
It's completely insane. And this is a bloated, ridiculous, anti-democratic chamber. And, you know, what's really perverse is that they are using our money to slosh about in alcohol while voting very often against things that we want. I mean, if you look at how the House of Lords behaved over the past 4 years in relation to Brexit, I mean, they often wielded their undemocratic, aristocratic power against Brexit to try and stymie it or kick it into the long grass or make sure that it didn't really happen. So this is a ridiculous, perverse institution because none of us voted for it. These people are in there for life. And as you say, there are scores and scores of Lib Dem peers, even though the public, the people, the demos, has rejected the Liberal Democrats numerous times in recent elections. This cannot go on much longer. I think there are lots of people out there who would probably like to have a referendum on the future of the House of Lords, just as we had a referendum on the European Union.
Yes, they spent £1 million on wine and £266,000 on beer. This, of course, is nicely subsidised. But to go back to the issue of this bloated chamber, can we not at least get to a position where the Prime Minister and the leaders of political parties are banned from appointing their mates anymore to the House of Lords?
Well, I mean, we definitely need reform. We definitely need to rethink how this institution works and how people are appointed. You know, the great irony is that, of course, the House of Lords used to be hereditary. So people were born into this position. They inherited it from their fathers because they were posh and rich and aristocratic. And then there were lots of reforms over the past few years which got rid of the hereditary peers and made them appointed peers instead. But in some ways, I think that made things worse. I mean, I've always been against the Lords, whether it was hereditary or appointed. But the appointed peers in some ways are worse because this is about politicians choosing their mates. This is about prime ministers choosing people who will carry on pushing their kind of politics, even when that prime minister has been voted out of office by us, the people. So it is it's a con trick. This institution exists in order for the establishment to retain its influence over politics, even if ordinary people vote it out of power. So some reforms are absolutely essential. I mean, my preferred view, I'm a bit of a radical on the House of Lords. I think it should be abolished, or at the very least, we need a public referendum on whether or not it should be abolished. But in the meantime, we need to reform it, less appointees, fewer members in the House of Lords, and it must absolutely be elected by us.
Yes, the point is, as you say, it's completely unrepresentative of whatever administration is in charge. What is interesting, I think, about the House of Lords now is it is a reflection of the British establishment or what the British establishment has become. There's still this kind of misconception that the British establishment are all Tory people playing golf in the local golf club and being mayors and being in the local council and all that sort of thing. No. The establishment of this country now work for The Guardian and the BBC, and that is what the House of Lords represents. It is an extremely left-leaning chamber that has been almost rabidly anti-Brexit, almost determined to stop the people getting what they voted for over the past 4 years.
Yeah, the House of Lords always reflects the establishment as it currently exists. And the establishment in the old days was, posh people in top hats moaning about the feckless poor. But the establishment these days are, trendy Guardianista types who still moan about the feckless poor, of course, but they do it via the issue of Brexit, for example, which they say was voted for by stupid, racist, ordinary people up and down the country. And therefore it falls to us very clever, educated people who've got a seat in the House of Lords. It falls to us to temper Brexit, to tame Brexit, to make sure that it's actually quite a moderate thing rather than a radical thing. So even though the House of Lords looks different, the people in there are different to the people of the past, it still plays this incredibly anti-democratic, authoritarian, patrician role in British politics, which is essentially to keep in check the commoners. I mean, literally, the House of Commons, common people elected by other common people. The House of Lords, which is full of barons and baronesses and bishops, that exists to keep the commoners in check. We shouldn't have that in the 21st century. We shouldn't have even had it in the 15th century. But to have it in 2020 is an abomination, in my view.
And do they deserve 300 quid a day just for turning up?
Absolutely not. It's ridiculous. I don't think we should pay anyone to lecture the public about their stupid democratic decisions. I think the problem with the House of Lords, they get a lot of money, they get a nice pension, they sit in this comfortable house, they get subsidized booze while the rest of us are stuck at home and can't even go to the pub. It's a real reflection of the massive chasm-like distance between the establishment and ordinary people. So you have ordinary people, millions of us, saying, listen, we want to democratize British politics, we want to leave the EU, we want to reorganize how we organize public affairs in this country. And then you have these stuffy appointees in the House of Lords, drunk on wine that we have partly paid for, saying we're not going to let you do that. How is it possible we have this situation in a supposedly modern democratic country like Britain? I really think if Boris has any bravery left, and it's not clear that he has, he would do what David Cameron did with the Lords. David Cameron argued for a referendum in relation to the EU, and that made him quite popular. Boris should argue for a referendum in relation to the Lords, and I bet you his popularity would soar if he did that.
Yes, because the House of Lords, of course, was once described as the best club in London. I've eaten there, actually. It's a splendid dining room. The food's great. The wine's perfect. Lovely bar afterwards. It's almost ludicrously comfortable and leisurely, if you like. And I know there are bars also attached to the House of Commons. But I don't wish to be illiberal about this, but perhaps we could suggest that the Lords, if they want to take part in the processes of government, should not be fed alcohol, perhaps close all their bars down, take the restaurant away, see how many people turn up then.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Take away the free food and the free booze or the subsidized booze. Maybe take away the 300 quid a day they get just for turning up and sitting in the chamber and often falling asleep. Take away all those perks, and maybe then we'll see who would actually turn up. The key problem, I think, with the Lords is that it is this, as you said earlier, it's a bloated institution. There are far too many people in there. None of them, in my view, have the right to be there. None of them have ever gone to the electorate and asked for our permission to make law or to change law or to tweak law. There are lots of countries around the world which have second chambers. I'm in favour of a unicameral system. I'm in favour of just having one parliamentary chamber. I know that's a fairly radical view, but if we're going to have a second chamber, it should be like the United States second chamber. It should be elected.
Absolutely.
Push all these appointees out into the public sphere and make them vie for our votes. That's the only position that we should take in relation to the House of Lords. And if Boris Johnson's got any gumption left, he should allow us to have that decision and allow us to make that decision about this institution.
Yeah, good idea. Let's have a referendum on the House of Lords. It would be a very interesting vote, that. Just before you go, Brendan, just generally on the whole continuation of the lockdown syndrome, this government, Boris, Matt and the gang, they've forgotten that we used to be adults making our own decisions about our lives. I think now that they're getting involved in saying, oh, we might give you 5 days for Christmas, but then we'll have to take 25 days off you for further lockdowns. You can do this, you can't do that. When are we going to get to a position when are they going to return to us as sentient adults, sentient British citizens, the right to make our own decisions about this health crisis and indeed everything else about our lives?
I think that's such an important question. I think that's the most important question of our times. And when I hear ministers saying, well, you might be allowed to have Christmas, but then we'll punish you with a lockdown in January, I just think, who the hell do these people think they are? The idea that people around Britain are waiting with bated breath to find out if Matt Hancock will allow us to have Christmas dinner with our family. These people must be absolutely nuts. Everyone I've spoken to, including people who like the lockdown, they've all said the same thing. We're going to have Christmas with as many people as we want, and there's nothing the government can do about it. There's going to come a real crunch point, I think, at Christmas and in the new year, where people will say, we've had enough of this. We can't have our personal, private lives governed to such a psychotic degree. And I think the government is losing it. I think there's been a woke coup in Downing Street. The so-called Brexit bad boys are out. The trendy, posh, woke girls are in. And they are pushing Boris in really problematic directions. Hard lockdown, green politics, virtue signalling and all this other nonsense. Boris needs to remember he was voted into power not by Guardianistas, but by ordinary people who want more democratic control over their lives. And if he forgets that, he's in serious trouble.
Yes, why doesn't Boris Johnson ever seem to do anything that might appeal to Tory voters? I mean, his Green Industrial Revolution is about as appealing to the average Tory voter as a full-on communist administration. Why is he doing that? Why doesn't he bring in some policies that Conservatives might appreciate?
Exactly. That's the question. And I'm sure lots of Conservative voters are asking precisely that question. When is he going to be a proper Conservative? When is he going to do the things that people voted for him to do? Why is he going down this rabbit hole of eco-nonsense and woke politics? That's not what the voters of the Red Wall want either. Those former Labour voters who entrusted their vote to Boris, they want Brexit. They want jobs. They want a good economy. They don't want permanent lockdown. They don't want eco-virtue signalling. They don't want that kind of Guardian-style politics. Someone in Downing Street needs to grab Boris by the scruff of his neck and make him realise who put him into power and why they put him into power.
And someone needs to get hold of Carrie Simons, if what I read about her is true, and tell her, Carrie, you are not a Conservative. Yeah. You're a Lib Dem or a Green. Yes. She's not a Tory, is she? No, she's not. And she seems to have an extraordinary influence on Boris, which I think is incredibly worrying. I refer to her this week as the Imelda Marcos of wokeness. This political wife who's using an extraordinary amount of power in Downing Street. But we didn't vote for her. No one voted for her, and I think it's about time we questioned why she's wielding so much influence. Yeah, my feeling about Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain is they may have had presentational problems. They may have had a style that rubbed people up the wrong way. But politically and philosophically, they were the kind of Tories that Conservative voters voted for. Yeah. They were leading Boris in the right Tory direction. Carrie and the Downing Street Ladies Committee, Munira Mirza and Allegra Stratton, are leading him in an insane direction that will be the death of him politically.
I think that's right. And he's going to regret this. You know, red wall voters are not stupid, despite what the chattering classes might say. These people understand politics. They know what's going on. They will look at Downing Street and ask why it's doing things that they don't want it to do. And they will remember this. You know, the working classes who were largely responsible for propelling Boris to power, they will be asking serious questions about what he's currently doing. And at the next election, if he doesn't change course, I think he's going to be in serious choppy waters.
He's going to be in serious choppy waters if he doesn't pull us out of this lockdown. If it carries on after December the 2nd, I think he's toast. He really is not quite getting the mood of the public. You're quite right, Brendan. Never mind the polls. I don't sense anyone is supporting what the government's doing anymore. There's a change of mood here, and rebellion, I think, is in the air. Brendan, I'm really glad we got to speak about the House of Lords at last, and thank you for your comments on the lockdown and the continuing madness of this government. Brendan O'Neill there, the editor of Spiked Online. Always a pleasure talking to him. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.